In the last video, we finished setting up the Beats library so that the Beats library can ship observability, security, and other operational data over to Elasticsearch. In this video, we're going to continue and create a WordPress plugin that will ship information about outdated WordPress plugins over to Elasticsearch. And later on in episode 8, I will also show how to get an alert if anyone should install new plugins, delete existing plugins, or make any changes to plugins in general. Now I should mention that this video that we're gonna, or this step that we're gonna work on, we don't actually need to have completed any of the Beats library integration. This step here, integrating WordPress with Elasticsearch, could be a completely standalone step. The only thing you would need is just Elasticsearch and Kibana up and running. So that's what we'll do in this video, work on the WordPress integration. The other thing I should say is that if we scroll up all the way to one of the previous steps, which is, let's see, not this one, I'm trying to find it. It is, right, this step here. So we skipped this step in the Beats episode, and this step basically automates and programmatically creates some of the tools that we would need in the WordPress, or in this particular episode where we do the WordPress integration. I skipped that step because I want to manually create some of the resources that we need for this WordPress integration. Once I've shown you how to manually create those resources, then we will revisit the step 2.x bash script and see how I programmatically automated some of those steps. So let's go ahead and focus on doing the WordPress integration such that WordPress can ship information about outdated plugins to Elasticsearch. Now to do this, in my GitHub project, I create this WordPress plugin that will copy over into every single WordPress instance or every single WordPress website. So just like the demonstration video, we're going to go back to our Elasticsearch server, and we already have this GitHub project checked out, and we're inside this WordPress directory. And in here, there's a WP content folder, and inside there's this plugins directory, and we can basically SCP this folder over to our WP1 server and our WP2 server. So let's do that. Evermite over to, and we'll do that for the other server as well. Okay, so now this plugin is over on the servers. Let's copy this plugin into each one of the 6 WordPress websites that we have. So I'll go over to this WordPress 1 server, and here we see that things were copied over successfully like this. So I'll just make another directory called plugins, and I'll just move it into this plugins directory because it'll just make my CP command a little bit easier to use. So CP recursive plugins, and then we'll put this into the web1 WP content plugins directory, and let's do this as well for web 2 and web 3. And we're going to change ownership to the Apache user so that I'll explain why. In fact, let's just do the whole directory. Everything in here should be owned by Apache anyway. So the reason we need to do this is because my plugin here, it will need to write a timestamp file to its own directory. So Apache needs to be able to have read and write access to itself or the plugins directory. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing on the second WordPress server, which is here. Let's make a plugins directory. Over here, and then plugins this over to, let's see, what was it? For www web 4 WP content plugins, like that. 5 and 6. Ownership must be by Apache, like that. Okay, so that should be good. And now let's activate and enable. Actually, let me just think. Do we want to activate these plugins right now? Or do we need to do something else? Okay, so we should look at the contents of this file first. So if I go to, let's say, var www web 1 wp content plugins, and go into the Evermite directory, and this one file, you'll see right at the top, I have some options that you can configure. For now, we can just leave everything as is, but you can see it's pretty self-explanatory. This plugin is going to send information to the ES01:9200. That's where our Elasticsearch is. We will connect with this Elastic user, and the password is change me. And this new user was something that we created in one of our earlier episodes. This plugin will only send information to Elasticsearch once every, 60 times 60 times 12. So that's basically every 12 hours. Basically 60 seconds times 60 minutes times 12 hours. That's the number of seconds that this file will throttle submissions to Elasticsearch. And we're going to reference the certificate authority that's on this server. So you can modify these. And in a moment, I will explain line by line what actually happens in this plugin. So I'll describe how it actually sends information to Elasticsearch. But before we do that, I think at this point, so we've done this, we've copied everything over, we've changed the ownership. We can basically activate this plugin. So let's go ahead and activate this plugin in WordPress. So we go to WordPress, and we can log in with the credentials to be admin. And I've already logged in for every single one of these other websites. And we just go to the plugins page, and we go ahead and activate plugins. And let's activate the rest. Now that the plugins are activated, according to this step, just like the demonstration, we should be able to visit each one of these URLs to ping the plugin, which would then in turn scan the WordPress website and send any outdated plugin information to Elasticsearch. So that's normally what would happen. But we can't really do that because we skipped this step over here, the 2 something sh. So this one, we skipped this step. And one of the things that this step does is that it sets up the database it will set up the Elasticsearch index that's needed to store information about outdated plugins. But because we didn't actually create that index, we could actually go ahead and hit the API routes that I specified here. We could try to do it. And I believe Elasticsearch will automatically create the index for us, but the mapping may not reflect the specific mapping that we want. And when I say the word mapping, for those of you familiar with Elasticsearch, mapping is basically the schema, right? Saying, column 1 or property 1 should be an integer. Column 2 or property 2 should be a timestamp. The next column should be an array of objects, etc., etc. If we don't explicitly state that mapping, then Elasticsearch is going to try to guess that mapping for us. And that may not be as precise or as accurate as we want it. So for now, instead of programmatically and automatically creating that mapping right out of the box, I will just show you how I went about doing it manually so that you can apply this process or theory to any other integration that you plan to create in the future. So if we look at this plugin file, basically what it really does is if you visit this URL, then, or any one of these URLs, then the URLs basically will hit this function within WordPress. As you can see, I've specified the URL format here, Evermite/v1 at this API endpoint. You'll see that that piece of text reflects this exactly, Evermite v1 plugin check. So should this URL get triggered, we will run this PHP function. This PHP function is therefore defined a little bit down here, I believe. Yes. So then it'll fire this function. And this function basically is just forwarding you to this function over here. And this function is basically defined up here. And this function really calls two native WordPress functions. So these two functions are inherent to the WordPress code base. This gives you a list of all the plugins. And this function, so it returns an array of all the functions. Let me say it again. This function returns an array of all the plugins that are installed on WordPress. And this function gives you an array of outdated plugins. So with these two arrays, I'm just doing a for each loop, and I'm looping through, let's see, which one is it? All plugins. I'm looping through all the plugins and just plucking out very specific information that I would like to send over to Elasticsearch. I don't need to send everything. I'm just going to send the name of the plugin that's out of date, the version that it's currently on, what is the new version that is available, what platforms it's been tested on, what require WP. So what is the minimum WordPress version that's needed for this newest plugin, and what is the minimum PHP version that's required for the latest plugin. And I just add this to an array, and I'm going to add a few additional pieces of information. The timestamp, the current website URL, so whether it's web1.evermite.net or web2.evermite.net or web3.evermite.net, etc., etc. I'm going to get the host name of the machine, which is WP1 in this case. If it were the other server, it would be WP2. And I'm just giving an count of the size of the array. So if there were 4 out-of-date plugins, then this count would return 4. And then I append all these plugins as an array over here. So this is the object that I am going to send over to. This is the object that I am going to send over to Elasticsearch. So this gets returned. This function returns this, which then gets loaded into this array of objects. Sorry, not an array of objects, just a single object. And that object, oh wait, actually it is an array of objects. Yeah, so an array of objects with plugins and such. And then I'm going to check a timestamp. This function is basic. I'll come back to this function afterwards. If there's no throttling, or if it's been more than 12 hours, then we go ahead and send all this information over to Elasticsearch. And then I update a timestamp. So let's talk about this function. This function checks, basically throttles requests to Elasticsearch. So if I come all the way back up here, this one. So this is saying if there's a file called .lastping in my current directory, or if it's missing, if that file doesn't exist, or if that file is pretty old, right? It's older than the 12 hours that we specified up here, then we will return true. So that's my way of making sure that even if you hit this URL 20,000 times in 1 second, it will still only send one submission to Elasticsearch within the 12-hour time frame. Okay. So of course, there's many different ways you can throttle this. This was just my very basic attempt to do this. If you want, you can store the last send time within the MySQL database, or maybe restrict this URL to be accessed only by localhost, and then use a cron job to ping it. There's many different ways. I thought this was the easiest way. It's the most flexible way for anyone who chooses to reverse engineer anything I've done. Right? You can just replace this line and maybe make it a database call or something else. Okay. So coming back down here, if we've exceeded that throttle time or the 12-hour window, then we go ahead and send all this information to Elasticsearch, and then we update that .lastPing file name with a new timestamp. Now to send things to Elasticsearch, it's just a curl statement, which is this function over here. Okay, so this function might seem like pretty complicated, but it's not. It's just a glorified curl statement. And this is the actual send. All this stuff is just basically preparing the data, passing in the username, passwords, and such. So that's all this plugin file does. Okay. Now, having said all that, now we can talk about what is the structure or mapping that's needed to store this information in Elasticsearch. And I've already done that homework for you in advance, and this is where we can kind of cheat. I'll go back to my Elasticsearch server, and if we scroll up a bit to the ES scripts directory, and in here I have a mappings directory. And if you look in the mappings, I have this WP plugins, and I've defined it for you. Basically, this is the mapping that you would need in Elasticsearch to receive all the outdated WordPress plugin information. So I can copy this, and I can go over to Elasticsearch, go to the Dev Tools. Let's say we go to Dev Tools, and I could just do a post like this, or put. It doesn't really matter. So let's say this is WP plugins. That's what we'll call it. And actually, yeah, we just start with that to create this. In fact, we should double check the name. If I come back to this, look at our plugins. I am sending it to an index called WP-plugins. So this must match this. Okay, so let's go ahead and create it. This resource already exists. This might be, oh, I know why. It's because I forgot that we have Heartbeat already running. So if we go over to, let's say over here. So basically this was meant to be explained in later episodes. So I'll go to uptime. I forgot that we already have Heartbeat. Heartbeat's already part of the Elastic Stack that I created through Docker Compose, and it's already pinging this URL. So it's already pinged it once. So therefore this URL has already made at least one submission to an index called WP plugins. And because WP plugins didn't exist, Elasticsearch automatically created it. So let me go to index management. Right, so you can see it was already made. But if we hadn't run Heartbeat, or even if we did, I am not completely confident that that Elasticsearch has chosen the right properties for every one of the fields. You can see it tried to guess the mapping. So just to be safe, I'm going to delete this index and quickly recreate it before Heartbeat has a chance to ping the URLs again. I'm going to delete. And let's go ahead and quickly run this right now. Yeah, let's run this right now. And now let's go ahead and create the mapping before Heartbeat does its thing. Like that. And let's do this. And I'm going to do it one more time because I don't know if I was fast enough. So I'm going to quickly delete it and run both those commands in succession as quickly as possible. Run, run. Okay, now let's take a look. And let's take a look at the mappings. Great, so now the index is exactly the way we want it. And now let me quickly visit each one of these URLs. And hopefully that would actually have created 6 documents in here. Okay, it may not have created it because I think we still have this .lastPing file that's restricting us from sending anything unless we wait sufficient amount of time. And I am going to cheat. I'll just go arm-rf web1, and WP content plugins Evermite dot last ping. Do this for 2, 3, and 4, and 5. 2, 3. And let's just test on these first 3 quickly. Hit refresh a few times. We should only need to hit it once, but I'm hitting it a few times to convince myself that only 3 records will appear. Okay, 2. It will probably become 3 in a moment. Sometimes this doesn't reflect as quickly, or we can check things quickly here. Get WP plugins, search. Okay, so only 2. Did I forget to, oh, mistake. Number 3. And now if we reload this a few times, we should still only get a maximum of 3. That's good. Hit reload and 3 documents through there. And if we look at the contents, we can see that there is mention of out-of-date plugins in here already, because for whatever reason, when we download the fresh new instance of WordPress, it came with an out-of-date anti-spam plugin. All right, so in terms of creating this mapping, we did it programmatically through here, but we can also do it programmatically through shell scripts, which is basically what I've done here. All right, so this mapping is loaded through this step 2 script that I mentioned. So if you look at this setup step 2, within here, we reference this mappings. And if you look at this mappings, you can see that we grab it from here and we load it in here. And this command is basically exactly this command. This Kibana dev console is just a wrapper to ultimately running a command similar to this. All right. Okay, so coming back to Kibana, what we want to do next is maybe set up some dashboards so that we can visualize some of this data. Now, to work with dashboards, the dashboards need to connect to something called data views or Kibana data views. So if I click over here and I go to Stack Management, go to Kibana data views. So you can see there are currently 4 data views. And what data views are, they're basically just another abstraction on top of Elasticsearch indices and data streams. And you can use a data view to basically work with or query or retrieve data from multiple indices. Okay, and dashboards need to work with these data views. So we're going to create a data view for our new WP plugins index. So I'll click on this and let's call it anything we want. I'll call it something easy to remember, like WP plugins. And this data view is going to map to any index that starts with WP -plugins and then anything after that. Actually, you know what? I'm going to delete the wildcard and we'll only make this data view point to just this one index. And we're going to use this timestamp, which is already associated with the WP plugins index. We'll map this timestamp as an actual timestamp to the data view as well. So timestamp to timestamp. I'll press save, and now this data view is made. And now we can actually work with dashboards that work with this data view, which in turn works with this WP plugins index. So if you go to either dashboard or even discover, you'll notice that here under discover, there's now a data view for WP plugins, and you can actually search for things here. So I was actually away for a few hours in between. I was just called away for a moment, but and that's why we're not seeing any data in the last 15 minutes. It's actually been several hours since. So I'm going to just increase this time frame. And now you can see that we get the 3 submissions from our WordPress plugins on out-of-date plugins. Okay, so if this discover area works, we also know that creating dashboards should also work. So I'm going to create a completely new dashboard. And I believe, okay, so this is basically an empty canvas that we can start working with. And we'll create our first visualization. And we'll make it a table. And we're going to query from the WP plugins data view as opposed to the other data views. You can either switch it here or you can switch it from here. Okay, so I've already got the WP plugins data view selected. And now I want to, let's take a look at what we've got here. I think I want to group things by the site URL. So let's start with that. And okay, so the rows, let's say top values. I think that's what we want, top values, or let's see what's under filters. No, top values, site URL. And I think, yeah, we'll start with that. And let's say for metrics, basically the columns, I want last value. And we'll pick some values here. So let's say we want the out of date plugin counts, so the number of plugins that are out of date. All right, so, okay, and then the other column we want, let me click here. Let's say the actual plugins, maybe, out of date plugins and plugins name keyword. Let's see. Oh, not the count, last value. And there we go. Okay, so what else? Let's rename. Oh, I think I want a timestamp. I want to know when we're actually getting these records. Let's pick timestamp field. And we want the last value. Okay, and let's reorder these columns for a moment, like this. And let's, you know what, I feel like this column's redundant. We don't really need the plugin count. We can see the list of plugins here. And what we're gonna do is maybe rename these headers. Actually, I wanna show more than 3 values. Let's show 10. And let's say, what are we gonna call it? We're gonna call it, I don't wanna group them. So if there are more than 10, it'll just loop, if you have this enabled, if there are more than 10, they'll just all get thrown into a bucket called others. I don't want to do that. I want to list 10 and I want to use pagination later so we can see everything. In the meantime, let's rename this. Here it is, site URL. And for this column, let's rename it to something different. Just call it timestamp. I'll just say time, that's short. And this, we will call it plugins. I just want to double check something here. Okay, that should be fine. All right, let's pick plugins or outdated plugins. Plugins. All right, so that should be it. And I think I can press save on this. And let's give this widget a title. Press save. Let's call this dashboard WordPress server. Okay, and just like that, we have made a dashboard with this widget here. We can always control the time frames to look further back or pick a time frame we actually want to look at. If I click here, it will always be here. So we've made ourselves a dashboard with one widget in it. So I think at this point, for most people, they're probably already happy with what they've achieved in terms of doing this WordPress integration, and they're probably moving on to the next integration with other dashboards and such. For me, I want to share this dashboard with you, which means I need to export it and then put it as part of Git version control so that I can distribute it through GitHub. So if you want to do something like that, you could also export this dashboard as well. This dashboard as you recall, is made of, or it's querying a data view, which means you also need to export the data view. So to preserve this dashboard and share it with others, you basically need to export two things, the dashboard and the data view. So how would we do that? Well, let's start with the dependencies first. The first thing we need to export is the Kibana data view. All right, so if I click in here, we need to export this as some kind of source file. And the way Kibana will do it is that they will export it as a JSON object. And let's actually try to do that. I'm back on my Elasticsearch server. And in the scripts directory, I have these bash scripts that can help you do some of these exports. I think for data view, I have this file here, data view get. And if you look at it, basically it's just running this API data views. It's going to ping the Kibana host. So that's Kibana:5601 / API data view, and the data view ID, which just from experience, I know that that data view ID is this ID here in the URL. But maybe in future versions of Kibana, and I'm not talking about far into the future, maybe even in the near future in a minor version update, you never know if the Elastic team chooses to use a different URL structure altogether, in which case you may not have access to this ID just by looking at the browser URL. So in that event, if you can't grab the ID from just a URL, I have a separate file here, data view list. And this queries the Kibana API to list all data views. Okay, so we can even do a test of it right now. List. And maybe this might be hard to see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly install a useful tool. Type in YJQ. So I'm going to install this package, this open source package called JQ, which will help us just parse some JSON data and make it easier to read, make things user-friendly. Usually it should be pretty quick. All right, so let's run this again. We're going to list a data view, but instead of the output appearing to the terminal window like this, we're going to pass it through to the JQ command, and we'll make it human readable friendly, or friendly human readable, like that. Okay. So now you can see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 data views, and you can see the IDs associated with it. So this is the ID that we want for the WP plugins data view. And now if I run data view get and I pass in the ID, this is the JSON representation of this data view here. And I will just git control this. So what I'll do is I can do this and just maybe save it to a folder. I already have a folder called data views, and I'll save it to a file called wp-plugins.json. All right, so that's good. I've got this data view, which means if I delete this, all right, so it's gone, I can re-import it again. So the import command is, I have something here that can help us. I believe it is, oh, not in here. Actually, it's in the setup. So if we look in the setup directory, I have setup data views. And if we look at this one file, one of these imports the WP plugins data view. So it's this one. So we are going to make a curl statement to the data view. It's a post statement. And we're just going to pass in this JSON file that we just saved to our host machine. So I'm going to make a copy of this. And I'll call it test.sh. And in this file, I'm going to delete all the other data view imports. And I want to import just this newly created WP plugins. So let's run this. And just like that, I believe if I hit refresh on the screen, we get our WP plugins data view back. And if we go to dashboards, go back to our WordPress server dashboard, yep, you can see right here, click in here, nothing is broken. But if I were to delete this, it would be broken. Right, so broken, but let's re-import that data view because it's a dependency for this dashboard. And there we go. So now we've successfully imported the data view or export and imported data view. Let's do the same thing for a dashboard. Let's export the dashboards. To export a dashboard, I also have another shell script that can make things easy for you. I believe it is saved objects find. Let's actually open that up. So you can see we're hitting the Kibana host and we're going to the saved objects API and we're running the find endpoint and we're gonna have to specify the type. From what I saw in the Kibana documentation, these are the valid types that you can pass through. So I'll just -t flag, I'll choose dashboard. So we'll list all available dashboards. And the dashboard, oh, it's just dashboard, like that. Oh, hard to read, so let's do this, JQ. Okay, there we go. So we see quite a few dashboards. We might have way too many dashboards. And yeah, because there's hundreds of dashboards after we've installed and configured all the beats. So what I'm going to do is I just know from experience that the dashboard ID we're interested in is this one over here. So I'm going to copy this ID. Copy. And now if I come back over here, clear, I do have a saved objects, find saved objects export. It should be this one. Let's take a look. And all we're doing here to export is we're running against the Kibana host with this API endpoint, saved objects export, passing the type and passing the ID we just copied. Again, the type is dashboard. So let's run this. Export -ID is this, -type is dashboard. And there you see the dashboard. So let's actually save this to the dashboards directory that I made. And I think I have, let's overwrite this. Now this isn't a standard JSON file. It is called an ND JSON file because inside that file are actually two JSON objects. In fact, you can even see it. This is one JSON object right here. And this is the second JSON object. So it's not a typical JSON file. So now that we've got that exported, we could really just delete this dashboard and then re-import it. So if I do this, delete this dashboard like that. And now if I were to re-import it, I believe in my setup directory, I have this dashboard. So we can, okay, it only imports one dashboard, so I don't have to make a copy of it. I can just run this on its own like this. And if I hit refresh, the WordPress server dashboard is back. All right, so that's how you can export dashboards and data views. Put them as part of your Git version control if you want to, and then it's easy to share with other developers or other team members. Or if you want to, let's say, add this to an Ansible or provisioning script to deploy new instances of Elasticsearch, now you have a way to automate all that. So coming back to our documentation here, if I were to, let's say, reflect on a particular, that script I mentioned, let's see, this 2 point something script, where is it? Setup 2 point, this one, all right? So now you can start to see what this script is really doing. Because in that script, setup step 2.x, you see all I'm doing is I'm just importing all those JSON objects and ND JSON objects, which basically reflects all the dashboards, all the data views, any extra indices, index mappings, a bunch of alert and rules that we'll cover in our last few episodes. Basically, I've exported all those things into JSON objects so that you can just re-import them with this one setup step 2.x shell script. Okay, and so while I was creating everything, I started off by creating everything manually, create all my dashboards, rules, and alerts and email alerts. I made them all manually, then I exported everything, put them in Git version control, and now everyone has access to it. So that's pretty much all there is when it comes to creating a WordPress plugin integration with Elasticsearch. Basically, set up an Elasticsearch index, get WordPress to send information to that index, and then if you want to read some dashboards, you'll need to create a data view for your index. Then you can create your visualizations and dashboards on top of those data views.